Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Town of Suez Committee of the Whole meeting. Tuesday, February the 27th, 2024, 9 a.m. Council Chambers. First off, we need approval of the agenda, and are there any late items?
No, there is not.
Thank you. We have Councillor Chung, Councillor Bennett, all in favor. Thank you. And the adoption of some minutes, Committee of the Whole minutes from February the 13th, 2024. We have the adoption of Councillor King, Councillor Poderica, all in favor. Thank you. And first off, we have a delegation from the UBC Water Pilot Study. We have Dr. Moseni, who is a professor at the University of British Columbia, and Martha White, an associate professor at the University of Alberta. So thank you very much, both of you, for coming here, and please go ahead, Dr. Moseni.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for welcoming us to your meeting. I'm here along with my colleague, Dr. White, to talk about our pilot studies of the water treatment options for the town of Osoyoos. So I'll go through some background about our organization that is behind this, which is Resol Center for Mobilizing Innovation, and then I get to a bit of a detail in terms of the nature of the studies and some of the early results that we obtained. So, Resol Center for Mobilizing Innovation is a non-profit organization that is based at the University of British Columbia. It's funded by the Government of Canada through the granting agency. And our mandate is really to provide solutions or bring about solutions to small and rural communities with respect to their water treatment. And our approach is the strategy that will be called the community circle. And that's really based on putting the community and their needs at the center and have them to be the driving force behind any activity as well. So a lot of engagement is involved in our activities. And so basically what is important in any small community, and also to some extent in large communities, but for small communities is very important because the idea behind adopting a solution is really they want to be involved. They don't want to be in a position that a solution is forced to them by either an outside consultant or manufacturer. And so as part of this process, when they are involved, they want to own and they want to be proud of what they achieve. So that's our approach when we are working with communities. So this is something that we keep in mind. So one thing I want to mention, this is a very complicated diagram, and I put it intentionally just to demonstrate the process of adopting a solution for a town and for someone like Kelly or Jared when they are involved in really finding a solution. From the time that the problem starts until when they actually go and make a decision and finally sign the contract, there are a lot of back and forth going, a lot of consideration that needs to happen from gathering the data, talking to people, various experts and so on. So really, the purpose of this is really to show that it's a very complicated process. It's not a simple process that I want to go and buy a dishwasher for my own, and I just go to the store and buy that. So that's really, and that if you keep that in mind, that's going to help really us to see how the process is going to go forward. And our job as an organization is really to make that process as much as possible simpler by gathering the data, by bringing or being a facilitator of gathering the data, supporting the communities in terms of their buying process or purchasing process. And at the end, really creating what we call a regret reduction playbook. Means that at the end, once that's all done, once the solution is in place, really we are all, or the community is very happy with the decision that they made and they have a good experience. So, as part of this process and our work, we've worked with multiple communities throughout the province, some indigenous communities, some non-indigenous communities. The size range from a few homes up to a population of 20,000. So there's a typo in there, but it's 20,000 in terms of the size of the population that we work with. So focus has been more on smaller communities. And as part of this process, we ended up having helping communities to lift their long-standing boil water advisories and supporting their operations and so on. So as part of this process, we have been also partnering with another nonprofit organization called AMI, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, which Martha can talk a little bit more about that one. And the idea is really to bring various aspects of newer technologies in really to find the solutions and with respect to operation. So basically leveraging the all the other innovations that are out there in terms of opportunities for automation, for decision supports, and even supporting the regulations as well. So coming to the collaboration with the town, there are multiple components in there. The scope is to collect, while we are here, collect as many water samples as possible to have a better understanding of how the water quality is and how it changes over time, and carrying out some research in terms of what type of solutions are possible, and that was done or is done through desktop studies and eventually a pilot testing that you saw the trailer in town for the past couple of months, and also I'll be talking about some of the results. So what the basically the challenge from what we have seen and what we've been told is that the current water supply contains some levels of minerals such as manganese and iron, and also ammonia as potential of concerns. And these are contaminants that need to be addressed in the water, but also some naturally occurring organic matter that by themselves are not very harmful. But when they are present, they cause some challenges in the water. So their impact is going to be secondary. And also looking at some operational considerations and long-term sustainability of the process. So as I mentioned, it involved collecting water samples, doing some studies, and also analyzing and reporting the data. So very briefly, as I mentioned, there are some elevated levels of organic matter in the water in multiple wells, and also there are iron, manganese, and ammonia. So these are some of the examples that you see here, and I'm sure you've seen the data from the annual report that shows the actual numbers, but on average, these are what we see here. So if you look at manganese, for example, which is the primary concern, we do have two levels. One is the aesthetic level, which is where we start to see smell, taste, and color of the water, and that's very low. So it's about 20 parts per billion, whereas for the town it's 100, and on average is about 130. And these are two wells. There are a couple of other wells that are elevated as well. So the two main wells, 4 and 5, they have these highly elevated, even above the maximum acceptable concentration, which is the Health Canada guideline in terms of health. For iron, it's just around hovering the aesthetic level. Again, that's what causes taste and smell of the water. And ammonia levels, we see that there is elevated levels as well. So there is no particular limits, but there are additional limits or some kind of guidelines associated with those as well. And this is, I just got it from the town's report. Now, one correction I should make is that the aesthetic level is shown as 0.04, which should be 0.02. So I think that's, in fact, if you bring that black line down, you see that even other wells that are now hovering around that aesthetic level are exceeding that. So we have more number of wells that are above the aesthetic limits. So. And this is another demonstration of the data that we have seen. You can see that it varies to some extent, but nonetheless, it's still for those two wells, 4 and 5. You see that for both of them, we are basically above the or around the maximum. For manganese, for sure, above the MAC or maximum acceptable concentration. For iron, we are just around aesthetic limits. So regardless, both of these are issues that need to be addressed. And so as part of our mobile treatment system or trailer that we have here, we've looked at what are the options or what are the solutions that we could have to address these problems. So we talked about iron and manganese and ammonia being the main issues, plus organic matter. So as I mentioned, organic matter by themselves are not of an issue. But what happens is that when you have them, they're going to affect other treatment processes. And also when you add chlorine, they're going to form disinfection byproducts as well. So that's the issue with organic matter. So we looked at what alternatives might be out there. So there are several technologies that are available. Based on our initial assessment, we've found that what we call absorptive or oxidation absorption technologies are good for manganese and iron. So I mean, the name actually may not be too significant, but there is a technology called Greensand Plus, which is a proven technology for manganese and to some extent iron. We chose that one. But also there is another one that is being used for smaller systems or smaller communities called Phylox. So this is another absorptive media. These are for iron and manganese. And there is biological filtration for ammonia removal that we adopted. And it's proposed as a solution, but it was not quite proven. So we brought that to test it to see how it works. And for organics, a process called ion exchange. And so basically it's replacing organics with chloride that is under resins. So it's much similar to Brita filters, basically. And so we tried these ones and tried to see how they work and how they function. Thanks. Okay. So here's I'm showing the Greensand Plus and Phylox, so two processes that we use for removal of manganese. So I'll go with the one that is a bit simpler to discuss. That green dots that you see is Phylox media. That shows that we get good removal of manganese. And when we get manganese removal, we get iron removal as well. So that on the surface is very good. I'll talk about the implications of that in a second. For the red dots, which is Greensand Plus, you see that it's quite variable. So it's initially it starts relatively good removal and it just creeps up again. And also there are some variability associated with that and inconsistencies. So here is the challenge that comes for both of them. With Greensand Plus, we need to for it to be effective, we need to continuously inject chlorine into this to keep it efficient for removing manganese. Now, the challenge is when we have ammonia in the system, ammonia consumes chlorine as well. So basically, it makes the system very difficult to control and very challenging and somewhat unpredictable, because if ammonia levels in the water changes, and we've seen that it changes from around 0.4 to sometimes 0.8. So that may not be significant, but what it does, it just actually consumes chlorine. So adjust, or basically the amount of chlorine it utilizes, it just changes as well. So for every 1 milligram of ammonia, we need to add 8 milligrams of chlorine. So when the amount doubles from 0.4 to 0.8, which means that double the amount of chlorine that is used. And that affects the performance of Green SAM Plus. So from operational point of view, it's going to be very unpredictable if you think about it. So that's one challenge, one major challenge with Green SAM Plus. Had there been no ammonia in the system, Green SAM Plus would have been very reliable and very good one to operate. And it's being used in many communities, large or small. Going to Phylox, you see that fairly good removal. The challenge with Phylox is that it does not remove ammonia as well. So basically, it's not affected by ammonia. But Phylox is more expensive materials on its own. So the cost is at least double to triple the amount of Green SAM Plus. So you need a lot more capital to spend on it. And also it's a lot heavier. So if you think about the grains of sand versus other types of materials, this is very heavy, high density, and every once in a while they need to be backwashed. So you can see that vertical line there, so that's a backwash point. So let's say 2 to 3 days, and even Phylox, they say every day there needs to be a backwash. So it means that we need to push with a lot of energy to basically do a backwash and agitate the system, and that requires a lot of energy. So from an operational point of view, and from an initial capital cost point of view, Phylox is a very expensive media. And for that reason, it's not being used in many communities. As far as I know, with talking to the manufacturers, there is only one community that they use. There's a local manufacturer, supplier of equipment in BC. They said the flow was 15 gallons a minute, which is probably a few homes. It's not. So wanted to keep that in mind. Next. So this is for organics. So for organics, as I mentioned, we used a process called ion exchange, and basically ion exchange, which is like a Brita filter type of operation. It uses resins, and by applying resins, you remove the organics. Now, if you use the regular ion exchange, every few days we need to regenerate it with salt, and that's costly. Here we operated it without any regeneration, without any basically sort of backwash or anything. So basically, we put the filter, we just kept it running. You can see that initially it performed quite well. So that red is the outlet concentration, was very low, and then it crept up and it stayed relatively constant with about 20-25% removal. Now we believe this can be improved by adjusting the flow rate, so it can be improved up to about 50% removal, and we've seen it in other places. So in terms of removal of organics, it's a fairly straightforward process, and it's been proven technology as well. So by some optimization, we can actually improve that. So the bottom line is that the main challenge with the water, what we have seen is the manganese and the presence of ammonia. I think that ammonia is what I call is a curveball to the whole thing, and that affects the process and efficiency of the process as well. So, and from the beginning, when I was called to basically look into that, I mean, having been to Soyuz a couple of times before, my question was now, what about lake water? I mean, there is a lake that is beautiful and it's pristine and potentially good solution or good option. And I asked Kelly a question about, is there any data on the lake water quality? And in fact, there was apparently, and I looked at historical data. So this is the data that we have on the water quality for the lake. So the organics is on average about 4 or 4.5. So very similar to the groundwater. And in fact, the groundwater or the well water you have is apparently, from what I see, is under the influence of surface water. So basically, in terms of level of organics, is very similar. Turbidity is fairly stable, just about 1, which is not bad. And then in terms of hardness and alkalinity, is much better than the groundwater. So it's basically, in terms of taste, would be a lot better taste for the people. So this is sort of a 1-year study that was done back in 2019, and you can see the variabilities of turbidity, and the brown or orange, and the blue is the organic levels. And you can see that it's fairly stable. So there are some variations, but for surface water, this is very good variability. So usually when we deal with surface water, because it's affected by the rain or snow melt or anything, all the activities, generally we might see more fluctuations, but this is relatively stable. So we can see that turbidity, as I mentioned, just is all hovering around 1.2. So basically, what if the lake water is an option? The first 4 that are there, I would put that as an advantage or as pros, if you want to call it. So it tastes better, often because it's not affected by minerals like iron, manganese, or other things. So, and also hardness and alkalinity is lower. Of course, no metals, so no issues with manganese and iron. In fact, the results have shown this. It's a more straightforward chemistry when it comes to treatment. So as I said, we don't have ammonia, we don't have manganese, we don't have iron. And in general, because of taste, more better public perception. I think that public perception is much better. For example, I just bring my own experience from other communities that we work with, particularly indigenous communities. They're often more willing to accept surface water because they see that it's coming from the sky, it's just coming, it's not affected by what happens underground. Now, there are 2 cons, if you want to call it. It's slightly more affected by weather events. So if there is a flood, something, it just causes some turbidity spikes or some UVT, what we call UV transmittance spike. And in the long run, there needs to be more source water protection. Not that groundwater doesn't have it, but certainly there is more needs for source water protection in terms of introduction of contaminants to the water in the long run. Next. So compared to groundwater, if we call it, so if I call it a pro for groundwater, I'm not too familiar, but I'm just guessing. The source is already, there are wells already in place. So that's the only thing. It's just some experience in terms of pumping the water from the ground. And then in terms of turbidity, less fluctuation exists there. So, I mean, turbidity is more so less than 1 often. What are the cons? Well, elevated levels of iron and manganese and ammonia, as we mentioned, higher alkalinity and hardness, which is poorer taste. And since this water is under the influence of surface water, the groundwater, almost all the cons that I mentioned for surface water are there as well for groundwater. So basically, organics are still elevated, need to be dealt with. In terms of disinfection, the same level of disinfection might happen. If there are any source water plan needs to be in place, that will be the same for groundwater, because if there is something introduced in the in the catchment in the area, it will affect this groundwater flow. So these are the cons that exist for groundwater. So that's in a basically a nutshell in terms of my assessment and based on the results that we've seen. There is another consideration that needs to be there. So if I just want to summarize, if you want to remove treat the groundwater, we must address ammonia problem separately from manganese and iron. Initially going to this, we thought we can put them together and address that, but our results showed that no, we need to separately do that. And that's really the advantage of the pilot, that we found that they must be addressed independent of one another. And then there is a dissolved organic control that must happen. And then it would go through disinfection, primary disinfection. You must use UV, which you don't have it now. In fact, because it's under the influence of surface water, UV is a must. And then we need to add chlorine. So these would be requirements that the drinking water officer from Interior Health would require for the town. And if you think about surface water, I would say you would eliminate ammonia and manganese and iron from the top one, and you just need to add what is called turbidity control. So basically, particulate matters if they're in the water. So the organic control and primary disinfection can be all done in basically would be the same. One possibility, depending on what surface water treatment you choose, turbidity control and organic control can combine together as well. So there is a possibility of joining them together. So in terms of potential footprints of the space that would require or the complexity of treatment, surface water would get a little bit of an edge in terms of both footprint and also the complexity, particularly with respect to chemistry. So I'm just going to stop here from my part. I don't know whether how you want to ask questions or you want to have Martha.
Thank you very much for providing that for us. I just want to point out that the president of the Lake Water Quality Society, Birgit Arnstein, is here. She joined us today. She is one of the ones who's done all the testing for the results that you've got. So I'm glad that she was here to see this. Thank you. Did anyone else have a question of Dr. Hussain? Okay.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. So first off, thank you for all the work. It's I love data. Slide 13. Just a question I just want to clarify. So with the numbers beside the months, those are the year, right?
Yes, those are the years. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And so we have known about the concentration of the manganese in the wells, especially with well 5 since 2009 then.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, so I just want to bring that. And then in terms of
just one thing.
Yeah.
The MAC was introduced more recently. So at the time, there was no maximum acceptable concentration by Health Canada. So those were introduced, I think, in 2019 or 20. So
to follow up on that, do you think that there will be in the future max on DOCs and ammonia?
Probably with ammonia, because that's going to be there are unofficial numbers as well. With DOC, it's very hard that there could be a MAC, but there is some kind of an unofficial guideline that is the water industry tries to follow, and that will be around 2 to 3 range would be the acceptable one, because that's historically it's been known not to cause disinfection byproducts when you add chlorine in the water.
And also to clarify, what DOC is a concern is when we treat with chlorine, we do break down into byproducts that are, carcinogen?
Yes, yeah, that's a primary one, if you straight use chlorination. There is also an additional things depending on the type of treatment. So for example, if you use, when you want to use UV, it just increases the amount of energy that is required. So when you reduce the level of organics, the amount of energy that you consume for UV is going to reduce as well.
And then with slide 15. The GSP, the spike at around like past the 200-hour mark, was that just because it hit that limit and then needs to be recharged?
That's a very good point. So as I mentioned, GSP, the process is that you need to continuously add chlorine to this to keep it regenerated, to keep it active. So if there is, let's say, no ammonia, you can just keep injecting as you operate, and it just keeps regenerating. So you won't see those spikes. Here, since we have ammonia, what happens is that the amount of chlorine we are adding is not enough to keep it regenerated. So at some point, it loses its activity. So when it hits that point, so you actually need to stop and not only do backwash, but you need to basically add a lot of bleach or chlorine to regenerate the media and then start operating it. So basically with the ammonia presence, it just loses its efficiency a lot more because ammonia consumes chlorine a lot faster.
And is the main reason for that because my understanding is Phylox is mainly manganese dioxide, and
Exactly.
manganese sand is like 3% or something.
Yes,
like that.
exactly.
So it just hits saturation point faster.
Yes.
And then with the surface water, I know there's gonna be concerns with the public in terms of spring runoff. I think it was slide 17, where we looked at sampling over the course of 2019. Was that done like throughout the whole year?
That's throughout the whole year. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, at different seasons. Yes.
So, I mean, this is gonna be a hard question. Could one assume that maybe the earlier samples were during spring? Because then it seems like there's a little bit higher of turbidity during that time.
Could be. I can look into my my data and see that, but yeah, it's possible.
But overall, it seems like it's fairly stable.
It's fairly stable, and my guess is that because of the lake, it just basically it has enough buffering capacity to dampen the effect of exterior rain and all that something.
Can I just jump in for a sec? I'm wondering about the sampling. I do know that the samples are taken over several months in the summertime, but I'm not sure that samples are taken all year long. I could be wrong. Is that taken from?
So this study, sorry,
Yes. Oh,
sorry, I have this study by Larry Aquatic, and they actually did sampling at different depths all the way through for the whole year, and we continue to do that this year, just to confirm.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And also UVT and turbidity are kind of synonymous, right? Like in terms of that metric.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think of any more. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to let Dr. White come and sit up and then yours? Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, there's another exciting part of this is what
Yeah, I'm still to work on most of the study, but I think we both think it could be very complimentary and possibly useful to the town, because that in the longer run. So, I've from the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, our goal is to bring AI into the real world, and drinking water treatment is a great way to do that. I guess I clicked, but it's not showing. No, it did. Okay. So yeah, there's opportunities to possibly incorporate AI into your current drinking water system or whatever one you end up choosing to do. And so what I wanted to tell you a little bit about is what is AI. It's terms around everywhere, but it's probably confusing about exactly what it is and why everyone's talking about it now. And then how it can possibly help reduce costs and why you might actually want to try to consider incorporating AI. All right, first. first, what? Here, so, just try again. Okay, what is AI? This is a very broad term that encompasses many automation approaches, many prediction approaches. But today, when most people say the word AI, they typically mean actually something more specific called machine learning. And the key property of machine learning systems is that they're using data. So it's not just about you making some more intelligent decisions or automation, it's all about how do we use the data that we now have to extract useful patterns from data and sort of even mimic useful things that people are doing. So the reason that this has now become such a big thing in our society is that we just have much more data collection now than we used to have. So many more sensors, much more ability to actually store all these huge data sets. And computation is becoming cheaper every year, so you can actually use these algorithms that process these large amounts of data to produce useful models. So as a result, because of these two things, lots of computation, lots of data, the machine learning systems have become more effective, and that's why you're starting to see them adopted everywhere. So the ideas have been around for a while, but we haven't had these two things. So what does that really mean for our world? What has really changed? So before there was a lot more engineering effort to try to build in what we know, so our human expert knowledge into our systems. And now what we try to do instead is to use, to learn these models directly from data. Okay, so it's sort of a big shift in how we try to control these strategies. Let me give you a couple examples of this. And sorry, too quickly. Okay, so for example, actually, I went past one slide. I'm sorry, this is a little bit finicky here. It's going the wrong direction. Okay, thank you. There we go. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so for example, maybe you've heard of ChatGPT or these large language models. In the past, chatbots have actually been around for quite some time. So in the past, it would be more likely that someone might just program in very specific scenarios. If someone asked you to play song X, then do Y. So that would be a much more common thing to do in the past. It's a big engineering effort. Now, actually, these models are being extracted directly from data, as I keep saying. So now, instead, models like ChatGPT, you just take huge internet scale data. They'll take almost as much information as they can from the internet, and then they just train these models on all of that data and actually end up just mimicking what people do. And so you get visual and conversations that come out of that. So it's a big shift in how it's done. It's actually surprising how well just training on huge amounts of data works there. More specifically important for you, for example, in drinking water treatment, maybe you have pumps for wells. Again, very common engineering thing to do is you might have a set of simple rules to turn on a pump if, let's say, a reservoir level drops and you want to increase flow. And now what you might do is that if you actually have lots of data for how these pumps, how water is pumped through the system, then you might try to take historical data and actually anticipate when is demand going to increase, and you might actually turn on pumps early in anticipation of that demand. Okay, so now how is that actually going to help reduce costs? So for example, again, these non-machine learning approaches, let's say if you just turn on pumps based on predetermined thresholds, then you're going to sort of be concentrating pumps on and off, and that's going to be using more energy. Another example that we've been looking at is reducing chemical usage. So if you're not really adapting how you're using chemicals in these systems, the safest thing is usually just to overdose. You keep your chemical levels higher, and of course you're wasting in terms of chemicals. So if you were to actually have an adaptive approach of learning as the data is coming into the system, for example, again, if you predict when demand is going to increase, then you can actually ramp up your pump speeds more slowly and save energy. For chemicals, of course, you could continuously adjust how much you're using to try to use the minimal level of chemicals that are sufficient. And one other important thing here is that it also helps reduce costs and that it can help people. So these systems are complicated to operate. There's too many things that an operator has to do. So the more that we can help operators do the job of controlling the systems, the better. So something that machine learning systems could do is they can learn to mimic some of what operators do and then potentially improve somewhat on what those operators do. But I will point out, of course, that this is a supportive tool. These systems in no way can actually replace operators. The goal there is just to help the operators make operate the systems more efficiently. And I'm going to give you an actual couple of examples of things that we have done to make this more concrete. So one project we have done is outside of this work throws out a project here in Valley, Alberta. It's a town of about 6,000 people, and they have an ultrafiltration system there, a membrane system. And so we were looking at how can we try to reduce energy costs and reduce chemical costs for operating their plant. So this is what their plant actually looks like. It's a picture of their plant. This is in a collaboration with an engineering company called ISO Engineering that set up this plant. So, you know, water comes into a big tank, it's mixed, the water's mixed in that tank, coagulants or chemicals are added to that tank to cause things to clump, and then everything's pushed through an ultrafiltration membrane system, and every once in a while you backwash to clear off that system. So we were looking at some of these control points, like how many chemicals should we add, how should we do backwashing, and so on. Picture here, there we go. So some of the things that we did here is, we want to, for example, reduce chemical usage, that those chemicals that are added in that first tank. Right now, what the operators have to do when they want to inject the chemicals is they take a set of jars, they actually look at their water and they add different levels of chemicals in those jars. And then they'll just from there looking at those jars decide this seems like a good level of chemicals to use. So it's a somewhat onerous process for them to do. Our goal is to see if we could adjust that automatically. So this curve here that shows this line coming down, we just started off the chemical level at a slightly overdose level and then saw if the system could actually bring it down to where the operators typically bring it. And that's exactly what we found that our system did. And here, this other picture is just showing that for the operators, we were also just making predictions real time about many of the sensors in the system, so they could actually see why our system was making the choices it was making. And more specific also to you guys. So of course, there's this mobile plant. So on this mobile plant over the last month, we've been looking at for this Green Sand Plus filter, if we could change how the chlorine is being added to this Green Sand Plus filter, and then measuring how much chlorine comes out the other end. So our goal here was to see could we actually get the right amount of chlorine to come out the other end, so measuring that on the other end. And so the top line here just shows we started off the system from a very small amount of chlorine, and again saw if the agent could bring, or this learning system could bring up the chlorine levels on the outlet of the system to the level that we wanted, which is exactly what it did here at the top. And the lower plot here just shows what the AI system is actually doing, how it's changing with the chlorine that's being added. So you can kind of see it kind of fluctuates a little bit as it tries to bring it down a little bit. Maybe if it starts to bring it down a little too much, then the chlorine on the other end is going to start coming down, so it brings it back up again. So you kind of see just constantly adjusting here. Maybe I'll add one thing to this is that we were actually pretty pleased with this result. We managed to get this Green Sand filter to work reasonably well, and that the chlorine would come nicely at the other end. But as Majid pointed out, ammonia does complicate things. So even though we got this a good level of chlorine on the other end, when you actually measure some of the manganese, it wasn't removing manganese as well as you would hope, given that that's how much chlorine is coming up the other end. So success, but also still complicated and by ammonia. Right, that's all I really wanted to tell you guys about. I feel like this is a slide that maybe Majid or Kayman would say, but I'm going to say it too. Big thank you to Kelly and Donald. And I think that's it.
So thank you, Kelly. Kelly's fairly new to the town of Vesuvius, and it looks like we're paying them the right amount. Thank you, Kelly, for what you do. So each one, can I just ask, each place like Drayton Valley, we have no idea what chemicals they have in their water or anything. So you'd have to absolutely look at every specific community to see what was needed and what you needed to take care of, right? You were just showing us the inside of it, not that you were comparing the water from Drayton Valley to Vesuvius. No.
Right, no, absolutely,
Yeah.
they're completely separate. I mean, one thing that is the promise of artificial intelligence approaches is that they should be able to specialize relatively quickly to each area. So you can use very similar strategies, and then those learning strategies specialize based on the data in those areas. So we're using very similar strategies for these two places, but absolutely no data sharing is happening right now.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Could, this kind of more of a question for Director Bouncing, could AI and machine learning be built into the SCADA upgrades when the time comes, or I guess what Kelly?
It's very cutting edge, so we're getting a basically free experimentation right now, so I'm hoping that at some point that it could be this. Maybe just make the system run more efficiently.
Thank you. And also just more so a point of clarification. It is not a sentient system, so it's not like Skynet, right?
Not even close.
Perfect.
So that we're getting AI and AI is in many ways, so
Yeah.
that's what that tells you.
If anything, it's more like smart homes where they kind of record the behaviors that they know you come home at 6:30, the lights go on, all like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about continually adapting, they're not learning general purpose knowledge or any of those things.
Thank you, I just want to clarify.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Go ahead, Councilor
Water
Pottery.
leadership migration process earlier. With the known hardest levels in our lake water, would that see a reduction in, let's say, homes that use water softener product?
So the lake water has perfect hardness, so it would, yes, they wouldn't even need them. So.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
If
Go-
one additional
You
point.
need to speak into a microphone. Thank you.
One additional point is that I'm coming from Vancouver, so Vancouver's water is very soft.
Yeah.
So what they need to do is just they need to actually add materials to reduce corrosiveness and other things, prevent this. So as Kelly mentioned, the level of hardness and alkalinity is perfect. So you don't need to worry about corrosiveness or softness of the water. At the same time, no hardness.
Did you have something else? Go ahead.
Just one more point of clarification, when the levels, when the water is measured, is the sampling done directly from the wells, or is it from like another area where, like on a pipe?
Right, for the treatment.
Yeah, just in general for the manganese levels and things like that.
We do raw water comprehensive, so directly from the well, and we also do, in the distribution system, just to see how our blending is going.
Thank you.
For our pilot, we just take it when it enters our mobile system.
So, go ahead, Councilor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question, so we've got a study between the lake and the wells. So now will the next step be getting the pricing on which is better on the long term, like what's gonna cost for chlorine, that kind of stuff? I imagine that's already being done.
Go ahead, Mr. Brownstein.
Thank you, musical chair, this morning. Yes, that is the next step, and then we'll be going back to council, next meeting, which is March 12th. We'll be going back with some costing for both capital and operational.
I was just gonna ask that as well. So at one point, when we looked into doing a water treatment plant, using the well water was about a third the price of using lake water, but that was about 5-6 years ago. So I'm just wondering if that is that your idea that it might be that amount, or do you know?
So your worship, some high level cost estimates right now, they're showing potential cost for surface water plant of 40 million. Groundwater at this point, we're not 100% sure on the cost associated with just the treatment aspect. Again, these are high level estimates, could be upwards of 30 million. So the cost benefits aren't as distinct as they once were going with the groundwater treatment. And again, these goes back to the complexities that were just outlined to you guys in regards to the fact that originally we were only looking at manganese removal. We are now looking at manganese removal, iron removal, ammonia removal, and DOC removal. So the complexity of the plant has changed drastically since the original pilots.
And could you also explain why the brown water, we've had manganese in the water, and we've known about this for a long time, and there were some initial studies done on certain wells, but it's the change in Health Canada that has magnified this problem. Am I correct?
Your worship, so basically what's happened is in the last 5 years, we've introduced chlorine regularly to our system as a requirement of both Interior Health and Health Canada regulations. So with the introduction of chlorine, we start to precipitate more of the manganese, so you start to see more brown water. We also see manganese now being pulled off the pipes because the pipes are now being introduced to chlorinated water. So it's a twofold problem. So it's both our distribution system and our water quality coming out of the ground.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Chung.
Thank you. In terms of these estimates, I know they're fairly high level, but what's your rationale when you develop these numbers?
Surface water, the high cost will be related to redoing a new lake and dig, as well as a new pump station, and then putting in an actual treatment plant. The groundwater aspect will be the complexities to do with groundwater treatment. Again, those are personally unknown at the exact cost right now. As I said, we have engaged an engineering firm to start that conversation. Surface water, the plant itself will probably be comparable in price. It's the other upgrades that come with surface water that will drive the cost up.
Go ahead.
One more. And is it common for municipalities to pull from the lake? Like how many municipalities in the region that you know of use lake water as opposed to well water?
Surface water is, I guess in BC is probably a little more common than groundwater. Up the valley, Addicton, Summerland, Peachland, Kelowna. I believe, I'm not sure about Vernon, I think pulls from Elgin Lake or Coquitlam Lake, anyways, mostly surface water. There are a few large municipalities that do groundwater, Chilliwack is one of them, they probably have one of the largest groundwater systems that I'm aware of. But their aquifer is quite high producing, it's directly influenced by the Better River. Metro Vancouver is also surface water, so they take from Capilano and Seymour reservoirs. If you want to go out of the province, Alberta is probably the next closest in amount of groundwater systems because of the inability to pull from lakes. But you look at major systems like Edmonton, it's surface water, Regina surface water. So most of the major systems are surface water because it's easier to treat and easier to produce.
So in terms of sustainability, surface water would mean that we can build this plant once and just have to operate and maintain it for the future.
That is correct. So this plant will be fully expandable. The restrictions to groundwater is again looking for more wells to drill as the community grows. As shown with 9 and 10 with the pilot, again, we still have the same water quality issues. We're going to continue to have the same water quality issues as we explore for more groundwater. So again, you've got a lake with fairly high quality water, but again, it's fully expandable and can again continue to provide water to this community for the next 50 years.
Thank you. My only concern is we're the bottom of the valley. And so anything that happens up the valley from Armstrong South affects Vesuvius. Might that be a concern, taking water from the lake?
So we've done some initial testing in regards to influence from further up the system. They've come back actually fairly positive. With most of the treatment systems upstream, their water quality probably far exceeds our groundwater quality coming into the catchment area. So I mean, you've got. Sure, so I'm gonna let Kelly explain even more.
So I can't say names, but a provincial authority just messaged me because they're watching. They said, remind council that as part of the Okanagan Basin is controlled, it is not likely to be affected by the same degree as other surface water sources. So Penticton and there's a monitoring system throughout the valley for the surface water,
So that's a positive. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, you need to sit there though. Thank you.
This is just for information, I mean, only. We have done some, this, as I said, as part of our mandate or promise, was just we do some assessment of water quality. We took some samples from the wells, particularly the well that we were operating, and we tested for this compound called parent polyfluoroalkyl substances, so PFAS, that is on the news quite heavily as well. So we have found that there are some PFAS in the groundwater. And the levels are, we've taken 3 samples, one before Christmas, one just after, basically January. And they show 2 different levels of concentration, but definitely there are PFAS in the groundwater. Now, I'm not sounding the alarm that it's going to be yet of an issue. But it's something that is around hovering the range that is of the proposed guidance by Health Canada, which is about 30 nanogram per liter. So just wanted to put that one at the table. And I think there was a surface water analysis done. I don't know what the results of that is, but certainly we found some in groundwater. Just wanted to put that one.
Well, thank you very much. You've given us a great deal of information to look at, and I just want to thank our operational services department for providing this trailer to do all these testing. And I assume that we will look forward to something at the next meeting on March the 12th, and we can continue this. So I just wanted to thank Dr. Moseni and Dr. White for coming today and doing this report for us. It's very much appreciated. Okay, so can we move on to the next report? And that would be Mr. Garish is going to come up and talk about childcare facilities. Thanks, Chris. Go ahead.
Oh, just gonna jump right into the presentation today. Not too much background other than just a quick reminder, probably more for my own benefit than councils, but last committee of the whole, you received your child needs assessment childcare plan report. And there was a fair number of recommendations in there. Obviously, from planning's perspective, there was some that caught our attention. But before I get to that, just a quick recap, at least from my perspective. So what I pulled out of that report is, the space does not have sufficient childcare spaces to meet demand going forward, and that's potentially an issue in relation to workforce participation. I take it from the report, one of the main challenges is staffing, and that as a result, overall, there's some deficiencies within the town for spaces, kids aged 0 to 3 and 6 to 12. Now, in terms of how that relates to the zoning bylaw, the assessment report did highlight under section 4.4 some specific zoning challenges, as it referred to it. It highlighted that childcare facility is currently only permitted in one zone within the town zoning bylaw, such as public and private institution zone. There's another issue in relation to childcare facility currently being restricted to 5 children as a home occupation. Yes, home occupation is allowed in the parent birth zones, but the legislation that that's relying on actually allows for more than 5 children. So something worth reviewing. And it also said that there's few incentives for childcare facilities to be located within the commercial zone, and I suspect that all relates back to the absence of childcare facilities being listed as permitted use in the commercial zones. So it further highlighted that there's opportunities with the zone bylaw review, which is ongoing at the moment. Some specific recommendations that I pulled out, italicized. I'll just read them quickly. So it's suggested the council can look at permitting a multi-age group care, childcare in more than just the P1 zone. Enhance the ability of commercial zones to accommodate multi-age group care, childcare facilities. And doing these might also strengthen policies and zoning to entice young families to town. So based on that, there were some very specific recommendations. I'm only going to touch on one of them today, but it did mention looking at, I think it was actually referring to bonusing, but with the recent Bill 44 changes, bonusing in relation to rezoning is not really on the table anymore. The province is encouraging both governments to look at amenity cost charge bylaws. And those ACC bylaws can be used to collect funds for daycares. It's also suggesting the council would develop updating its DCC bylaw, which I understand is an ongoing project. And then obviously with the zoning bylaw, what can we do in terms of making it more permissible in a wider variety of zones than the current PI. Again, just a little bit more background context. A lot of what was in the town's report was based on Stepping Stones, which is a study or a guide put out by the province with UBCM's assistance, and suggests a lot of the same stuff in terms of ensuring definitions within the zoning bylaws consistent with provincial legislation, listing childcare as permitted use wherever it's deemed appropriate. However, where it's not deemed appropriate, to try to create the least complicated path forward for anybody looking to open a childcare facility. So, taking direction from those two documents, we put together a couple of recommendations for you to consider today, which we can build into the draft zoning bylaw, and then go to public input on it later in the zoning bylaw review process. So there's three things to discuss. Looking at the definitions in the zoning bylaw, the big one, which I think Council might want to spend some time discussing potentially with us, is the range of zones that you would look at potentially allowing daycares in. And then the zoning regulations, which at the moment is really just related to the number of parking spaces that you might want to have a childcare facility provide on site. So in terms of definitions, I put up a juxtaposition here of the current versus the proposed. There's really not too much change other than fleshing out under the proposed what compliance with the provincial legislation means. And that's clarifying that provincial legislation allows for 8 and local governments can't otherwise try to prohibit an operator who's licensed with the province and not providing space for more than 8 children, that can occur in any zone. Really, the only standard they're held to, for the most part, is BC Building Code. Obviously, there's some other things council can impose, and the parking is probably the big one. So definition, to me, that's a pretty straightforward change. We would supplement that, and this is an extract from the draft of the zoning bylaw, where we're clarifying it's not just some of these licensed facilities from the province, but there's other things that council might want to consider just allowing permitted use in every zone. Excuse me. And so we're listing off here that daycare for less than 8 people across the board. It's just clear, transparent in the bylaw. It's permitted. Not necessarily tied to the home occupation use anymore. It's updated from the 5 to the 8. Sorry. Okay, so this is one I want to draw council's attention to. So putting this forward, I mean, staff do stand behind the recommendation, but certainly as a starting point for discussion, how far do you want to go and potentially respond to the child care needs assessment in terms of making your zones more flexible and open for child care facilities? For us, obviously maintaining the existing institutional zone PI is an obvious starting point. But from that, building out and including, and I've only included the reference to the downtown commercial zone here, but I suspect it's probably merit in considering the highway commercial zone as well. So expanding into your commercial zones, and then obviously probably the more contentious one, I've got some slides to speak to this in a second, is the extent to which you might want to allow it within your residential zones. And obviously with Bill 44 changes and the province encouraging the town to consolidate, reduce the number of residential zones, have them more flexible. That's great, but when you only have one residential zone in your municipality, it kind of limits your ability to tailor childcare centers to specific residential zones when there's now going to be potentially one zone going forward. So I've asked, and this just for presentation purposes, I asked the GIS folks to take the town zoning map and add colors to it so that we can see a little bit more clearly what the implications of expanding the footprint of childcare facilities might look like. And again, the yellow didn't really come out that great, but you can see where the RS1 zones are within the town, where the downtown commercial zone is, which is the bright red, and highway commercial is kind of the washed out pink, and the neighborhood commercial, there's not too many of those zones within the town, but there are a few hard to pick out here. But if council was to expand it into the residential and commercial zones, you can see the footprint and the areas that childcare centers would be permitted. So obviously from an operator's perspective, that opens the field a lot more, but as we know, childcare centers can be contentious, and I just did a quick Google search. Tried to keep it relevant to the valley in BC, but I mean, there is one, the example here, but they do face concerns from residents in other communities where they have tried to introduce them to residential neighborhoods. At least at the front end, it's hard to find headlines where childcare facility has been an ongoing issue once it's been approved by council. It tends to be an issue at the zoning stage, but after it's been approved, it disappears as an issue. So keep that in mind. And then the last one I have, which I wanted to highlight, so this was City of Delta late 2023. I think it's a very similar approach to what's being discussed here today in terms of how are you going to accommodate childcare facilities to meet what your childcare assessment has identified as a shortcoming and additional space is needed to go forward. And so from what I could see, Delta took the position, which is basically before you today, in terms of allowing childcare facilities in all zones. But of course, that's already set out by provincial legislation. Only really restricting it in the residential and agriculture zones. And I expect in agriculture zones is really agricultural land commission. But even this momentous move to add childcare spaces did not tackle introducing them as permitted use across the board in residential zones beyond what the provinces said is required, which is less than 8 kids. So for context too, we also looked at some of the local governments in the south end of the valley to see how they deal with this. I think that was attachment number 1 to your report is a table showing how those municipalities deal with it. Penticton by far has the largest number of zones that's allowed childcare facilities in, but we look at the list, you can see that they're almost overwhelmingly commercial zones. And the extent to which they allow them in the residential, it's only been medium density and what the city calls its cluster residential zone. Summerland is commercial and institutional, and interestingly, one of their high density zones, and then Oliver is only commercial and institutional zones. So nobody in the valley has really tackled low density residential permitted use for daycares. How they deal with it is they refer to it as a daycare center major, and I believe for the most part they're still requiring individual rezoning applications if you want to promote those into a residential. So we can discuss this now, or we can wait till the end and discuss it. But obviously, the options for council in relation to the zoning, and this is in order descending from staff's recommendation. So we recommended that you consider the low density residential zones, the commercial zones, and the institutional zones. But that's obviously not the only option before you. Option 3 is status quo, where you simply maintain it in the existing institutional zones, but you do have something in between staff's recommendation and the status quo. That would be expanding the range of commercial zones you allow it in, or potentially even putting a cap on the residential zones, maybe less than 20 kids, maybe less than 15 kids, and then we can come back with different options depending on what we direct today. So I'll just move on now to the last item, which is the kind of some of the zoning regulations. At the moment, the town's bylaw only really speaks to parking spaces, and it sets it out at 1.5 spaces per employee. We're recommending, and again, just to facilitate centers that that parking requirement be reduced. But of course, keeping in mind that when I think people express concerns about daycares coming into the residential neighborhoods, 2 issues seem to come up most often: noise and parking. Or also vehicle movements in and out at particular times of day, being drop off and pick up, and quiet residential streets. Is that something that they want to see happening? If council's not happy with the proposed 1 space per employee, there's other things we can look at, which would be by floor area of the operation or by number of children. We can come out with different options if not happy with the 1 per employee. So this is just a recap. I won't spend too much time on it. We've already touched on the slide, and I think that is it for my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garish. I just had one question. The childcare licensing regulations, that would preclude some places from having childcare centers if they do not have an outdoor space, if they do not have parks close by, number of washrooms, that type of thing. I'm concerned about when with Bill 44, that we start putting residential zones on smaller acreages, a smaller piece of land. And I'm wondering how that would affect, this. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, no, it's a good point you raise in relation to the provincial licensing. So the exemption that prohibits local government trying to stop a daycare facility going in is premised on that daycare facility being licensed by the province, and the province has its own criteria against which it will assess it. So if it's an unlicensed daycare facility, it doesn't benefit from that exemption. So therefore, I suppose one could argue that I have to go back and read your bylaw that the home occupation allowance would deal with those situations. And so, and again, depending on the direction it's received today, if it's not to allow it broadly across the board in residential zones, I suspect we would come back to you and ask you still want to preserve smaller size daycare as a home occupation use, so that we can capture or allow the unlicensed ones to continue to operate more or less in the same way or in the same level playing field as licensed ones.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a point of clarification. When you're talking here about childcare, like you talk about 8 children, but I see a part in there that said multi-age group homes. And I'm just wondering if, like, a multi-age group home, I just wonder why all these towns are against this. I'm wondering, I could see, I don't want somebody in a multi-age group home next to me with kids that are 14, 15 that are problem children. But if I see Johnny's little guy and then their little guys are 2, 3, 5 years old playing yard, I don't see that as a residential problem. Are the people upset because they're multi-age group homes? Or is there some that says a child care, this is just only talking about children under say 8 years, or a limitation that says what do you mean by child care?
Chris?
Well, so my takeaway from the town's childcare needs assessment was when they were talking about multi-age childcare facilities, I think they grouped it into 3 different sections. Kids 0 to 3, 3 to 5, and then 6 to 12, and so that was a multi-age group. But from a different perspective, I think also what we're looking at with the draft zoning bylaw is the extent of the zones that allow for the congregate care facilities, and potentially expanding those as well. I mean, it's a common occurrence, and I mean, so we're talking about adults now, but totally different subject. It's not uncommon to find that type of use permitted in the medium density zones as a care facility. And I suspect we might come back to some future point in terms of allowing those also in commercial zones. So for the licensing for provincial, I'm not an expert in this, and I have to probably double check, but I'm inclined to think that if it's your childcare needs assessment was looking at 0 to 12, I suspect provincial licensing is probably the same age range. So as long as it's 8 or less, and it's licensed by the province, then it's allowed to happen wherever.
So we're talking 0 to 12.
Well, that was my takeaway from the town's childcare assessment. That's the age group that you're trying to target this incorporation of the zone file review childcare discussions.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. My only hesitation is in terms of safety. Is there a possibility to, this may be unpopular, to potentially reduce the speed limit from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour? Doing some quick math, I mean, that's just a reduction. If we're driving 2 kilometers, it's just a reduction from 4 minutes to 2.5 minutes. And we know survivability in terms of a car accident is much higher being at 30 kilometers an hour versus 50. Is that a possibility?
I guess I'm not answering that question. Speed reduction is always a possibility. I guess my question to the committee would be, how do we go about addressing that if you're going to allow childcare in multiple zonings and multiple areas within the community? If you have an industrial zone parcel and you're reducing the speed 30 kilometers an hour, that may affect the highway, or that may affect a major arterial corridor or collector or something like that. Some communities have gone down the path is that all municipal roads are 30 kilometers an hour in the discussion. there is an enforcement side of this as well that you must consider. Just because you've lowered the speed to 30 kilometers an hour doesn't mean people are gonna drive 30 kilometers an hour, so then you're having to enforce those speed limits to make them effective. So there's options on council's plate. I mean, you could do site-specific speed reduction, you could do a community speed reduction. You just have to come up with some ideas.
Anyone else? Counselor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Could we do site specific for a shelter instead of the whole zone?
Certainly, and I'm assuming because of the way the zone bylaw is currently written, that's probably the approach that you have to take at the moment. And certainly going forward, we could look at even putting policies in to reflect council's preference, like what is it that you would be looking for daycare to address on a site-specific basis if we came in for rezoning? But just keeping in mind, I mean, those headlines that I showed you from other communities that deal with, I mean, the public hearing and the rezoning process then becomes the focal point for community discussion on these. And, you know, if you look at the child care assessment from the province as well as your own is recommending, it's like reducing those regulatory burdens that may be creating disincentive, creating some of these new child care spaces. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I could support that, Elaine. I guess it relates to a registered provincial daycare. If they're younger, like 1 to 4, they have to be separated, say from the 5 to 12 and have a lot of space. I think we only have 1 in town. Now you're looking at an individual just coming to town for a business license to open a daycare. So I go back to, if we don't use residential, we haven't really got much space you're really talking about putting in it. So how are we expanding it?
Can you answer, Chris?
Well, if council's desire is not to see it allowed in residential zones, then we would still be looking for direction of what you want to do in relation to commercial zones, right? Because at the moment, it's just your institutional zone, which your child care needs assessment is highlighted as a potential problem, right? So, I mean, you can maintain the status quo, but you can also start building it out, and commercial is an option, residential is an option, and theoretically even industrial is an option. Although with industrial, arguably, provincial legislation already allows somebody to do 8 industrial zone if that's really where they want to locate it. I'm just not sure of the desirability of that.
So then, could you just come back with a report first or review the options then? And you've given us a couple of thoughts, but it's not really a report back on the difference.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, certainly, I mean, if council is willing to make some motions asking for specific information, we can respond to it. My coming to today was obviously in relation to the drafting of the new zoning bylaw to seek direction as we're putting together the zones for residential, industrial, and commercial, which usage should we be allowing, and hopefully getting some direction on that. And then in terms of implementation, obviously the draft zoning bylaw is going to be subject to some public engagement. And I mean, we can certainly highlight as part of the materials that we put out in relation to that, some of the significant changes that are being proposed within the bylaw. One of which would be how the town deals with childcare facilities and how we opportunity to get some public feedback, which you'd be able to review before first reading. And if it's uniformly negative or there's concerns, then we can certainly revisit at that time. But we can also come back with a report too.
Well, I guess I don't want to get ahead of myself then. I think it'd be prudent to come back with the new bylaws around Bill 44 before we move into childcare, which I believe you started to work on and you presented to us.
Yeah, well, that was the point of the previous presentations to committee. Like again, to seek direction on how do we respond to Bill 44 and what are we drafting in terms of the zoning bylaw to deal with those legislative requirements.
Can I just ask, Mr. Garish, I'm looking at the town of Oliver, similar size and, characteristics, that, when did they have, is this very new that their zoning that they've got here? Because they've got it in administrative, institutional, cultural, which doesn't, in the attachment 1 that you gave us, which is quite a bit less than what we're suggesting here. And I'm just wondering, might they have to go through the same process that we are in order to change zoning, in order to accommodate some of the new rules or not? Do you know?
Potentially, so we used to provide planning service to the town.
Yes.
And, so I was involved in the drafting of their zoning bylaw, it was adopted by council. And so that would have been in 2017, so we're talking 7 years ago now.
Okay.
But we stopped providing planning service in 2019, and I'm not sure if in the interim, the town has had a childcare needs assessment completed in the same way, that the town of Soyuz has. And if they have, did it make similar recommendations in terms of, looking at the zones that they allow it, and if it did, where does council have with that? I'd have to follow up with their, director of
Sure.
development services, see what's going on.
So I do know that when the RDOS did a childcare assessment and they did the zoning and the childcare centers, the Sirius was not included. We didn't know about it. It was the childcare center that made the recommendations there. So I'm thinking that was part of the regional one that was done probably in the last 5 years. I'm pretty sure. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have anything? Go ahead, Councillor Chung.
Thank you. I think the report laid out in front of us is sufficient to potentially make some options here. Like I support expanding the range of zones to include low density residential, and with the stipulations of safety, if we can find a way to reduce the speed limit. That's my only point of concern. And then regarding the recommendation of amending the 1.5 spaces per employee to 1 space, I also support that option as well.
So would you like to make a recommendation? Because we have one in front of us.
That is a recommendation that I would like to make.
Thank you. Do we need a seconder on that? Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Chung or Councillor Bonarica? Is there any other concerns here? Could we then have, go ahead?
So your worship, just for clarity,
Yes.
is Councillor Chung doing recommendation that's within the report, or are you doing a sub motion for administration to also go back and look at speeds? I just want to get clarity, are you including speeds within the motion?
Yes.
Because then it's contingent. Or would you prefer to make separate motions, or it wouldn't, or would you would not be in support of this if the speeds were not reduced? If they're one and the same, then I suggest to me I'm putting together, but if you're going, no, I'm still happy with what's being proposed here, but I want to see if I can do more here, maybe you want to separate them.
In that case, it's overall in support of expanding the zones. But I guess a separate motion would be made to explore the possibility of speed reduction, mainly really in the low density residential zones. I have no concerns with the industrial zone.
Okay, then would you like to, the recommendation that's there, you're still standing by that? And we're not including, we'll do a separate motion for reducing the speed in a minute. Can we deal with this first?
Yes, 100%.
Good. So the motion the recommended motion is there. That's been moved and seconded. I will take a vote. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried. So now you wanted to make a separate one?
I'll make the motion that we explore the possibility of speed reduction in the residential zone as well.
And just the low density residential zones or all of the zones?
Judging from the map, I would just say the residential zone, but if it makes it easier, we can add the commercial.
Go ahead, Mr. Brownstein.
I'm guessing my question to Councillor Chung is, I guess what level of effort do you want to put into this? Is my first question. Two, residential zoning is probably more conducive to speed reduction than start looking at commercial and institutional, or institutional is already speed reduced, but any other zoning related to that, so industrial. I get, again, back to my first question, that's your level of effort. again, staff capacity, ability to get this looked at effectively and appropriately is something that is not on the plate currently. This is something the council is needing, and I need some, unfortunately, need some budget to do so.
Go ahead.
Well, let's just stick with residential zones.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor King. All right, so can we vote on that? All in favor of that motion? Thank you. All right, so, thank you very much, Mr. Garish. We love the slides that Mr. Garish always supplies. He is very concise and to the point, so I appreciate that. All right, our next, thing we have on here is the service level for curbside collection. And that would be, Director Brownstein.
Thank you, Your Worship. As so nicely pointed out, curbside collection is not going up for renewal. As part of that contract renewal, there is the discussion of going full automation in regards to curbside collection, which would require the purchase of carts for all residential properties within the community. This is a service level change from our current semi-automated collection. And I just want some councillor committee's feedback and information on whether or not they feel the service level change is warranted and whether or not they want to commit to $350,000 to such a service level change.
So I'm going to speak to this first because we've had a long discussion about this at the regional district table as well. And certainly Area A is involved with a lot of the other rural areas and updating. When we asked several of the questions about doing this, the concern, I think, for some of them was the 3 carts. And so there's one for garbage, one for recycling, and one for organic waste. That, especially in areas that have a small footprint, that's a lot for everybody to have. And it was more in municipalities than in open areas for sure. But that was a concern. And when somebody else had asked, what about the carts that I already have? Can they be used with the new system? Apparently not. And the reason is that the new carts, all of them, have a chip in them. And that chip will get recorded as when the garbage was picked up. So you can't say they didn't pick up my garbage today outside there, because they have a picture of it. They know when the garbage truck went by. They know that there was no garbage available at that time. It's very sophisticated, so you don't have a chance for complaining about, your garbage not being picked up. And so I guess it was carts in the high residential areas where you might have 3 and 4 properties, on a single lot. Not yet, but that's a possibility. So does each individual home need 3 carts? That was kind of one of the concerns, because that could be a huge overload. Do you know anything about that?
So with a cart program, yes, every user would have 3 carts. Currently, our bylaw does not allow for, I believe it's more than 5 units to be part of our collection program. So if there's a 4-plex or a 5-plex, they can be part of the collection program. Anybody beyond 5 units would actually have to have their own service developed through Waste Connections or Waste Management or whoever else would service them. So yes, getting back to your question, if there was a 4-plex, they would have individual carts for each one of those units. So you would have a total of 12 carts sitting on the property.
Thank you. Mrs. Hilson, did you have something? Oh, sorry. Anybody else have any concerns about this or it's obviously gonna cost more because our program, our contract expires in a year, and they need a year's lead up time in order to order the carts and get the contract ready, am I correct?
So we are the odd municipality out, and I actually have till 2020, or we have till 2026 to make this decision. But I do need direction from the committee and council very quickly, yes, to order the carts and get them in play prior to that contract renewal. We are looking at a regional cart purchasing program, and we want to get on board with Penticton and Sunderland, and Oliver, and everybody else as we purchase these carts.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Puerto Rica, and then Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you, Greg Ramsey. That initial, would that roughly cover the service life for the duration of the contract, or would that annual upkeep, would that be ongoing moving forward if that was the system we maintained?
So the initial capital cost would be $350,000, so that'd be a one-time purchase for the length of the contract. On average, carts are lasting about 10 years, so within 10 years, you have to renew every cart. If everything goes according to plan, you renew every cart. If not, you space them out and maybe renew them after 15 years, depending on the condition that they're at. We are requesting $45,000 a year, an operating budget to provide cart replacement, cart maintenance, as they become damaged or misplaced. RFBI tags do help with that, but they seem to just notice driving to work this morning, there's a cart sitting on the side of the road in the city of Penticton. So again, they do seem to grow legs and walk away, so there is a replacement required regards to carts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If this was to move forward, what happens to the carts everybody has right now? Does town pick them up, or we take them to the sanitary dump?
So the recycling carts will remain in play. So the ones that are currently provided by the town will remain in play. If an individual property owner has decided to purchase a cart on their own behalf, unfortunately, those will have to be removed and taken out of service by the property owner. So we would provide a new cart at that time.
Go ahead.
Your Worship. I guess based on the assumption that if we were to stay maintaining our status quo, we will be able to participate in that regional contract, correct?
So if it's the committee's decision to present to council that they want to stay with semi-automated collection, yes, we will have to pull out of the regional contract. We will be out on our own, we will go for our own procurement process, and we'll look to a semi-automated collection service.
Thank you. And are we the last municipality that is semi-automated in most municipalities, not the regional districts?
So for municipalities, yes, so everybody north of us does have carts, so Oliver is carted, City of Penticton has carts, Summerland has carts. The regional district, ourselves and Caramias are the ones that are currently not part of a full automation.
Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. If we were to forego this time and I go and maintain our semi-automated collection model, how long does that contract usually last for?
So I'm going to try to paraphrase the question. So our current contract expires in 2026. So after 2026, we would have to go out for a new semi-automatic contract. That contract could last as long as council feels fit. We would come back with recommendations. It could be anywhere from 5 years to 10 years, depending on contract length and economies of scale. The longer you pull a contract out, usually the more cost effective it is for the contractor. So if you only do a 1-year contract with semi-automated, you're going to see your costs go up. If you're going to do a 5-year program, well, then their costs are going to come down because they see longevity of contract. So recommendations probably coming out of administration be at least a 5-year contract if we go on our own. And then after 5 years, you look at renewals again.
Thank you. Can I ask, I don't know whether you know this or not, there is on Tuesday, which is today, there is garbage pickup in town. I'm assuming that that same truck also picks up some of the garbage in area A. Do you know about that? It looked to me like it was the same truck because it comes to my house and that's why I'm asking.
So yes, your worship, that same truck does service area A. So if we pull out of the regional solid waste contract, the contractor that is providing services to area A will not be restricted to area A and will not be coming to town. They may lose a little bit of efficiencies, but again, that's the name of the game if we decide to continue to do semi-automated. If we continue with full automation, as pointed out in the report, then we would still be part of that, and there would be deficiencies within Area A.
Go ahead, Councillor King.
Do you know offhand how many waste management companies are in the area?
We, during the RFP process, trying to remember, I believe there were 5 proposals. Of those proposals, only one was again the highest ranked proponent. So there may be opportunity for those other companies to provide services to a Soyuz, but again, this is a fairly small service area. Majority of the big players won't come out because of the fact this is so small. If they do come out, their costs are gonna be probably fairly high because we're gonna be a one-off. You may see more of a local approach or one of the smaller companies coming in to provide services. And again, I don't know what that looks like right now because we haven't got that stuff.
I'm just gonna say, having listened to the reports and the comments from the regional district, I do feel that it's important to really look at collaborating with everybody in the regional district. I think that's going to be for economies of scale, for sharing trucks and so to me, I know that there's a cost to it, but to me, it makes the most sense. So I would certainly be in favor of going with the regional district in terms of coordinating a contract. Thank you. Okay.
To the questions, I guess the first one, the fact we had, this always done. Still has all these stuff in the regional district here, and there was some initial discussion about that food waste, food recycling, organics waste. Would that also exclude us from that, obviously, in terms of how we would possibly collect that? If we were in the solo, or everyone else would be in a different pickup scenario?
It probably wouldn't exclude us down, probably, it would probably end up costing us more money. Depending on the service provider and how they decide to collect food waste. There would still be a need to somehow have some sort of depositing container at the curb. You don't want to start seeing a variety of different containers at the curb for this contractor to pick up. So again, this is a cost question. I can bring back, and I will be bringing back a report on the 12th in regards to more detail and direction from council. And then once the service level from carts is established, we will then be coming back with another report in regards to service levels for curbside collection. So there are options for us in regards to curbside collection, and depending on which road the community goes down right now, those options would send it back to the committee.
And one more here, has there been any concern identified, either within the regional district or by the contractors in terms of maybe changing legislation in BC, let's say work safe or preventive injuries? Obviously, if we're solo one, I hate to be in a situation where we opt out and then 2 years down the road, works legislation changes where, or there's a shift in, in terms of the industry where, we only do, automatic collection, and 2 years later, we're hit with, oh, by the way, yeah, this is being phased out, and we're now stuck in a situation where we're gonna have to go, I'd say probably no different than when we originally opted out of automated bins, and then I think there's a change in BC legislation, for Recycle BC, that requires to have an automated bin type bin for recycling purposes, and then we had to go out that cost for maybe to convince cost savings initially. Just wondering if there's any discussion on that, or that's the work safe side, if there's any future legislation changes that may affect that.
So I'm not aware of any work safe related legislation in regards to curbside collection. There has been some feedback from our current collection contractor that they do struggle with trying to find staff who are willing to do physical labor. So they're seeing high turnover rates. You're seeing truck driver burnout fairly quickly. So as part of their OH&S management programs, they're trying to move towards a fully automated system to provide that relief to their staff.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to heard you right. I think community joining together saves us a lot of money. As you bring back the report though, could we actually just stay with what we have, like just recycle, pickup and garbage? Is one of the options when you come back with a report, or do we have to go full scale to the other two things?
So Counselor King, that's the idea of this report right now, is to get that direction from the committee at this point to say whether or not you guys want to continue with status quo, or do you guys want to move down the path of full automation, which requires a commitment to carts. Again, time is unfortunately of the essence here, and I'm juggling a fair amount of unfortunate calls right now, and I just need some, some direction from you guys on what you want to see moving forward.
Councillor Bennett's next, but can you check with workman's compensation, because I have a feeling that that there are some rules put in about garbage pickup, and I'm just wondering, could we have that checked?
I'm not a problem, Your Worship. I mean, the only thing that comes at the top of my head in regards to work safe is the ability to lift 50 kilograms, and that's their limiting factor, but I can definitely look into what work safe is suggesting at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question on the cost to the end user, to the resident. If we go 3 bins, are they gonna be charged extra, or if they had to stay the 2 bins? Are we gonna increase the cost then by going to 3 bins? I know our cost is around $350, so a little bit of tax increase, but I'm just wondering the monthly payment, how that adjusts.
So, Councilor Bennett, currently, if we go full automation, there will be a capital cost of $350,000 plus an additional $45,000 per year. The actual cost of collection should remain within current budget. So the unknown right now is that council decides to have those semi-automated. I don't know the costs associated with that at this time. The highest ranked proponent didn't give us that option. They basically said full automation or nothing. And the other proponents are willing to negotiate individually with municipalities. They didn't want it all, or they wanted nothing. So we had to go for an RFP and judge the contractors and find out who's even interested and how much the cost related. So my gut feeling is yes, the costs will go up if you continue with semi-automated from a collection perspective.
Okay, are there any other questions, concerns? So what are you looking at today? Do you have enough information, Mr. Brownstein, to come back with a report on the 12th, or did you need something more specific?
Your Worship, there's 2 options before council in the committee report, and I'm asking for council or for the committee to recommend 1 of 2 options to council.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Director. No, Mr. Councilor, go ahead, Councilor.
Your Worship, I would move option 2 that council recommended or the committee recommended council that council endorses the service level change and move forward with the implementation of fully automated card.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? I'll second that one. So, if there are any other concerns, about it at the moment? All right, so we will take a vote on that. All in favor? Against? Thank you. So that carried. So is that enough that you can deal with it at the next meeting?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's definitely an issue that is top of mind everywhere right now, and so understand that we have different points of view on it for sure. Thank you, Mr. Brownstein. And next is the Mrs. Hilson, the SILGA resolution.
Thank you, Your Worship. At the January 9th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, Council received the 2024 call to resolutions from the Southern Interior Local Government Association, otherwise known as SILGA. Council had expressed interest in drafting a resolution to be forwarded to SILGA and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, so UBCM. And so administration has noted that council has also brought concerns forward about the current, I guess, climate in our community. And As part of that, the town is committed to ensuring that the town of Soyuz is a safe and professional workplace. Whereas staff, contractors, volunteers, and as well as council members are treated with dignity and respect. And administration has drafted the attached resolution for council's consideration to forward to SILGA and then GBCM. And so we're bringing this forward if council has any recommended changes, questions, concerns prior to this going to the regular open meeting today with council's endorsement, because that is one of the requirements to send a resolution to SILGA, is that it has to be endorsed by the municipal council. So this resolution is being brought forward to you today for your direction, any changes, recommendations prior to being placed on the agenda for this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hilton. Appreciate that you've done this. I just wanted to note that it must be not only endorsed by council, but it must be relative to regional issues. It cannot just be a specific issue. To my mind, this does include that, and it includes many municipal leaders and staffs around the province. So I'm okay with it. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. I am in strong support of this resolution on many fronts. My parents immigrated over here from China. One of the biggest values that was kind of woven into the framework of Canadian society is freedom of speech, and it's something we value above all else. So I don't want this to be misinterpreted as an assault on that. My concerns are with the potential future legal implications of not providing a safe workplace for our staff, and also sustainability for future candidates who would like to take public office. And I think that with the current temperature of our community, it has become a deterrent for any future applicants. And I think we just need to have the tools available to us so that we can all work efficiently and effectively and move forward with the interests of the community in a constructive manner. With that long rant over, I would like to move option 1.
Thank you. Anyone, Councillor King? Thank you. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm in favor as well, as I was at the Okanagan Library Regional Board the other day. And there's 3 people from other communities that were within the Okanagan Regional Library that were being attacked in similar ways. But one lady came and was going to sit on one of the committees, and she says, I don't dare sit on the committee because they may come start protesting at the library. So it's something that's got to be stopped. It's not just here. So I'm sure we'll get more support at Sylvan.
Thank you very much. So appreciate that you went through and where you were very careful and you've included, you know, the resolve that further changes would aim at also upholding principles of freedom of speech and transparency. So that has been included in there. Thank you very much. I think it's important as well that we do this, and I'm totally in favor of it as well. So it's been moved and seconded that we go with option, the option that was recommended. And I will ask the question, all in favor? Thank you very much. So you'll send that to Sylvia.
No, this will actually be placed, come up this afternoon under business rising from committee of the whole, and council will approve that resolution.
Absolutely, and then it can be sent.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
perfect, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I believe we've come to the end of the meeting. Councillor King, Councillor Chong, Vice Chairman,